Hello my beautiful people, welcome back to another bookish video. I'm very excited because today we are doing my first ever monthly wrap up. So I'm going to be going through all of the books that I read in the month of August, and August was actually a really good reading month for me. I somehow read 5 books this month, which I think might be the most books I've ever read in a single month. So I'm very proud of myself. Let's just start off with that. I feel like Book Talk and BookTube is filled with monthly wrap-ups that are like 15 plus books long, and that is just not realistic for me as someone who is self-employed and runs 2 businesses. I am nowhere near a feral reader whatsoever at all, so the fact that I read 5 books in the month of August is already like crazy to me. I do think it is because I entered my romance era just a little bit, and so the books were a little bit shorter than my average fantasy books that I read. To preface this, not only am I a slow reader, but I do read primarily fantasy, and I feel like the fantasy books that I read are like 500 to 700 pages long, so definitely a bit longer than the books that I did get through this month, and obviously the language is just a little bit more complex. Anyways, I digress. That's not why you guys are here. You are not here to hear me ramble about that, but let's just get into this. I'm so excited. I started off the month of August reading People We Meet on Vacation by Emily Henry. This was my first ever Emily Henry read, and I was already, I believe, in between like 60 to 80 pages into it when I started it in the month of August, but I blasted through it. This is the book that I read on my drive down to the cottage and on kind of the first day at our cottage. If you're interested in seeing a little bit more of like a behind the scenes reading vlog, I did film a full reading vlog at the cottage, and you guys can go check that out. It is up on my channel. And the reason why I don't have the physical copy of that book with me, I am a physical copy girl through and through, is that as soon as I finished it, my mom took it. It was like, I'm reading this now, because I could not stop talking about it. I finished it at the cottage, and it was all anyone heard me speak about for the next 24 hours. It was my first romance read in a really long time, and by really long time I literally mean since like January. So almost 6 months I had been reading basically straight fantasy, and I absolutely love this. I think not only does Emily Henry write real people, like people that are relatable, a realistic world that feels relatable. I find in romance books sometimes, especially modern era romance books, they don't feel like the real world, especially when technology and phones and texting are brought in. I just don't love it, but this was one of the first romance books that I really did. The premise is that these 2 best friends go on a summer vacation together every year, and the point of view flips back and forth between their previous summer vacations and then their current summer vacation that they're on right now, which is kind of like they're reconnecting and possibly falling in love. But basically they had a falling out, which is why it's flipping back and forth, kind of moving us forward at 2 different points in time throughout the book. And we kind of get to see these 2 main characters who were best friends in the previous tense and then now are kind of reconnecting and trying to figure out what they are in present tense, which I really loved. Overall, I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, which is really rare for me, I feel like, to give a romance book a 5 out of 5 stars, but as we get into my other reads, you'll see there's a lot of romance, which is surprising for me. But I just loved Poppy and Alex's characters. I feel like they were both really well written and rounded people, and they actually felt relatable and like real people, which, like I was saying, is one of the biggest things that I don't like typically about romance books, is just that the people don't feel real. And when I'm gravitating towards a romance book, I want it to feel like it actually could happen and is a real scenario. For my first Emily Henry read, and I know not a lot of people like People We Meet on Vacation, so I'm actually really excited to get into some of her other works, possibly later this month and into the fall. Next, I read Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune, another romance book and another summer romance book. I definitely had a big book theme going on in the month of August between summer and romance and just like light-hearted reads, and I also loved this one. I know a lot of people say that this is Carly Fortune's arguably worst book. I loved it. I think that I just found it so relatable because it takes place, again, at 2 separate timelines. It was very similar to People We Meet on Vacation in that way, that we're kind of following these characters at 2 separate points in time, getting their backstory and their future story at the same time. It takes place in downtown Toronto in the past tense, and then at a lakeside resort in Muskoka, Ontario in the present tense. And I think that both of those settings were just so relatable to me. I fell in love. Not only do I live in Toronto, but I read this book up at my cottage near the Muskoka region, So it just felt like it fit so perfectly and I could relate to it so much. The premise of this book is that the main characters, Fern and Will, had this one amazing day, 24-hour day together almost 10 years ago, and that is the past tense that we get. And now 10 years later, Fern's mother passed away and she gets called to basically leave Toronto and go run her mom's lakeside resort in Muskoka, which she never wanted to do. Will basically disappeared from her life. They were supposed to meet up 1 year later after that amazing day together, and he never showed up and she was left waiting. So they basically are hung up on each other for almost 10 years, and I feel like that was the part that at first I couldn't really get over. I was like, that just doesn't seem realistic. Like, I get that like you can meet someone and they can change your life, but I don't really feel like you could be hung up on someone / fall in love with someone after 24 hours and have them forever in your mind and heart 10 years later, even though you never saw them again. So that whole premise to me was like a little unrealistic, but it did really grow on me. I loved Carly Fortune's writing style. It is a adult romance, so there was a few spicy scenes, but nothing overwhelming. Like, I think there was 2 or 3. So on the lower spice end, which is kind of like where I like a good adult romance book, like nothing too crazy. It's not the main premise. It's not like the entire book. Like, I love a good scene here and there, and that's what I felt like this was. I also love that we get glimpses of her mom. Even though she passed away, some of the pages had diary entries from her mom, which also play into the storyline really nicely. And overall, it's not only a romance, but kind of a tale of grief and grieving and how to get through tough situations in life, but come out stronger, which I thought was very heartwarming and I really liked. And I gave this a 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it by the end. This is one of the only books that has ever made me cry. I'd say it got me in the last, I want to say like 40 pages. I, up until that point, was thinking it was going to be a solid 4.5 or 4.75 star for me. And then I hit this like last little chunk of the book and I was like clutching my heart. Please don't end this way. Why are you doing this to me? And then it ended amazing. I loved it. And the copy that I have also had a little bonus chapter that was written in Will's point of view. And it just summed everything up so perfectly and like fully rounded out the 5 stars. I was so close to giving it a 6 stars, but I feel like I still haven't determined what my criteria for a 6-star read is, and I just gave this a solid 5 out of 5 stars. The only fantasy book that I read this month was Caravel by Stephanie Garber. I have had this on my physical TBR for almost 2 years and it's just been sitting on my shelf. I literally own the entire trilogy as well as the entire like subplot trilogy, Once Upon a Broken Heart, so I finally decided to give this a try. It is a YA kind of romantic-y fantasy, and the premise of Caravel is that it revolves around these 2 sisters who have an abusive father. Basically, since their mother kind of disappeared from their life, ran away, we don't really know what happened to her too much other than that she's no longer in the picture. Their dad kind of became abusive and the girls started dreaming of going to play and enter in this caravel that happens every year. It basically is like a magical contest with the prizes different every year, and this year the prize is 1 wish. The girls do get to go and play in the caravel, but the one sister gets taken and she becomes the prize of the caravel. Like, all of the people playing the game have to try and find her, which is Donatella, to win the prize, whereas Scarlett, the other sister, is playing the game and she's also obviously trying to find her sister and win the prize, but like is going throughout the book this tug of war of, am I trying to find my sister to win the game, or am I trying to find my sister to find my sister? Stephanie Garber's writing style in this book is very interesting. It's nothing like I've ever read, which I think was a little bit hard for me to get into at first. The way she describes things, and I want to say the complexity of her writing style, but not even like the complexity of her writing style, because it's not that complex. It is a YA book, like it's not hard to understand at all. But I think the way that she wrote Scarlett's feelings, because Scarlett feels everything in color, which one of my friends told me this before I started reading it and it did not make sense to me, but now that I've read it, like makes 100% sense. So I'll say this and you may not get it if you haven't read this book, but Scarlett feels and sees things in color, and that's how Stephanie Garber writes. So throughout the book, we're getting descriptions of things and colors of basically everything. Like, her mood is blue, but like way more descriptive than that. And she's feeling a very specific color of blue, or seeing envy in such a specific shade of green. Keep that in mind, I guess, going into this book, is that there's so much use of color, and color as like a descriptor for how our main character Scarlet feels. It is written in third-person POV, and I tend to like fantasies more that are written in third-person POV. I think that we just get a better, well-rounded sense of what's going on, and it tells the story a little bit better rather than first-person fantasy. I know some people love first-person fantasy, but I find that fantasy just gets told better in third person. So I did really enjoy it. Overall, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. I did fall in love with Julian. Like, he may be a new book boyfriend for me. I thought his character was so well-rounded, and I loved the little mysteries and intricacies and things that we find out along the way. Plot twists, you guys. Plot twists. Not only plot twists, but we are left off on a cliffhanger, of course, because it is trilogy and it is fantasy, so like, why wouldn't we be left off on a cliffhanger? I think that this book really just takes you for a little bit of a brain spin, and I had to go back and reread things sometimes because I was a little confused as to what was going on and what I was even reading. But overall, really well written, really magical. Like, it really entrances you into the whole world. Like, you get sunk into Caravel itself. I feel like when I was reading this, I was really encapsulated and entrapped in the world, and I loved it. If you're looking for a good YA fantasy to really take you out of the present moment and like get you sunk into the world, like, a book has not done that for me in a while, I'd say, other than like ACOTAR, Throne of Glass in terms of fantasy. This really did it for me, and I loved it. So again, solid 4.5 out of 5 stars, because I did feel like there was something a little bit missing for me, but overall really well done, and I'm excited to read book 2. Next up, I read Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez, and I will preface this by saying this was my first Abby Jimenez book, and lots of people told me that I should be reading Part of Your World, and then there's one other Abby Jimenez book that she wrote before this just to understand this one better. I'll preface this by saying that I looked into it and I don't quite get why people say that. Maybe someone can explain it to me in the comments. And I obviously will read Abby Jimenez's other works, but I fully understood this, felt the emotional attachment, and loved it just the same, even though I haven't read any of her other works. I know someone said that there's like lines of characters within like each book, like it's kind of like sub characters that are all in the same universe world situation. Like, obviously it's a romance and real life, but modern day romance. But I have been told that Abby Jimenez's books are kind of like the characters play into each other. But I loved this as my first Abby Jimenez book. I felt at the beginning that the writing style was a little dry, a little boring, but I was enjoying it and found it really quick to go through. I wasn't getting super attached to Justin, the male main character, right away. I feel like once we uncovered both Justin and Emma's stories a bit further, I'd say like 150 pages into the book, I was really enjoying it. But I feel like I haven't even prefaced. Just for the Summer is about Emma and Justin, who both think they are cursed in the dating world. Basically, everyone who dates these people break up with them to go on and find their soulmate. So they decide, why don't we fake date for a while? We date and then we'll break up and we'll find our soulmates. So that is how they come together to start basically fake dating, and it started over a Reddit thread, which I feel like that's a big thing that made me pick this up, is because I love a good like am I the asshole Reddit thread. That is initially what gravitated me towards this book, but I love that it is so much deeper than just a little lighthearted meet cute romance. There's so many deep themes, and I'm someone that like will skim a trigger warning at the beginning but not really care too much about it, especially when it's like a lighter trigger warning. So I will put that out there that this book did have a trigger warning. I know it has some things about panic attacks and PTSD, and it just has so many deeper themes than just like a meet cute romance, which I went into this book expecting it to be and came out so much happier and fulfilled with what the book actually delivered. So definitely would recommend. I am giving it a solid 4.75 out of 5 stars. I feel like there was something like just slightly missing the mark for it to be a 5-star read for me. I did really like it, but I didn't feel the same emotional attachment that I did in People We Meet on Vacation or Meet Me at the Lake to the characters, even though like the themes were deeper and it had a lot more meaning. I feel like it just didn't quite hit the mark for me, but it was still a beautiful book, and I did really enjoy this. I finished it in like a week, which is really quick for me, seeing as I started it like after I left the cottage and just in like regular life, but I did thoroughly enjoy this and loved the book. I do have to say before we move on to my last read of August is that I loved how well-rounded these characters were. I feel like we got to see into their family lives a lot more than the other romances that I read, which I did like. I find that I do like a romance book that has a little bit of a bigger cast and has a little bit more family attachment, and we get to learn people's backgrounds and like attachment styles and love lives like outside of the primary romance. So I will give Abby Jimenez that I really did like that part of the romance, and just Justin's whole family situation as well as Emma's whole family situation, like it played into their romance, because I feel like in a real life situation your families do play in so much. So I love that she added that in, and also again like the people just felt really real, and I will give that to all of the romance authors that I read this month. Like the romance stories felt real, they felt realistic and relatable, which I did really enjoy. And the last book that I read in August, again, we are kind of on the theme here, but it was This Summer Will Be Different, another Carly Fortune book. As soon as I finished Meet Me at the Lake, a ton of people recommended this book and then her other book Every Summer After to me, and this one was recommended a little bit more, so I went out and picked it up right away, and I like straggled from my original August TBR just a little bit because I wanted to finish off the month reading this because it was a summer read, and obviously September I guess is still technically kind of summer because the first official day of fall isn't until September 21st, but fall starts for me on September 1st, so I was like, I want to read this before September rolls around and like wrap up summer nicely with another meet cute kind of summer read. But this Carly Fortune book is about Lucy and Felix, and it is my best friend's brother trope, which I don't think I've ever read in my best friend's brother trope book, and I did end up really enjoying it. But essentially it is another jump back and forth timeline book. I don't know if I realized so many romances are like that, or maybe it's just all the romances that I picked up to read this month have the timeline jumps. But basically Lucy's best friend is getting married, and that's the one timeline, and she's kind of going through a bit of a life crisis right before she gets married. But the romance side of this story is more so about her best friend Lucy and her younger brother Felix, who have hooked up over the course of the summers when Lucy and Bridget go back home to Bridget's hometown in PEI, where her younger brother lives. And essentially revolves around basically these three main characters, kind of goes back and forth between the timelines. Again, it was another meet cute, and I do really love Carly Fortune's writing style. I think it's really easy to read, really easy to follow, but also a little bit more complex than like what I typically find a romance book to be. Like she just has a little bit of a more extensive vocabulary, which I personally really enjoy, and so I did really enjoy this read as well. And I'm giving it a solid 4.5 out of 5 stars because I do feel like there was just something a little bit missing for me. I feel like it is mostly the setting, because it was like a flip back and forth between Toronto and PEI, but mostly PEI, and I just don't personally have an attachment to PEI. I feel like I couldn't relate as much as I would have liked to the book, but still overall a really good read. That finishes up my little August reading wrap up and all of the books that I read last month. Definitely stay tuned because I have my September TBR coming soon, as well as another book haul. I've been buying so many books, it's like not okay, and I think I need to go on a book buying ban. But I do have my September TBR and another book haul coming very soon. But let me know what your favorite book that you read in August was down in the comments below. I always love hearing what you guys are reading, as well as getting more books to add to my TBR, because I feel like the TBR is ever growing and I am always reading, so I always need new books to add to it. But I hope you guys enjoyed this little bookish video. But I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!